hmm Okay, we're straight. Thanks for your patience and good morning, everyone. Good Monday morning, and welcome to the Seven Cities Forums of Hampton Roads presents Portsmouth Coffee Talk. My name is James M. Overton, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Leah Drake Stiff and Thomas the Colonel Chapman. And we have a special guest this morning, a reoccurring guest, Dr. Ernestine Duncan. You all know her, and good morning, Dr. Duncan.
Good morning.
Yes, and as we close out Women's History Month, we want to have Dr. Duncan on here to talk about women and mental health and some of the issues that women might have. And first, Dr. Duncan, I want to bring up, we all been watching uh, Judge Brown Jackson, the confirmation hearings. And I said Brown Jackson because I did not want to mess up her name, her first name.
Katanji,
But
Katanji,
thank you, Katanje.
Katanji.
And
Yes,
and you all know me. I will
yes.
do it. But
You'll
anyway,
mess a name up
I
in the.
wanted I wanted to start with her before we continue on because during the hearing, someone asked her one of the pleasant senators asked her a question, and she said, you know how she's making it. She said perseverance, and as we sat and watched how they were coming at her, and then also seeing her daughter sitting there, you know, hearing some of the senators come at her, yelling at her, uh, you know, I don't know, fulfilling their platform for whatever they want to do in the future, and how that has to affect her, but she held her ground because she knew who she is, and she also knows what a woman is. But that was a crazy question, but for her and then her daughter to sit there, and I guess her daughter, that's a good lesson for her. But I know that had to be sort of disturbing for a daughter to see them come at her mother like that. But it probably also was a good lesson for her daughter going forward. Uh, to see her mother sit there and you know endure something like that. And as we talk about that, a lot of women, especially African American women, have gone through things like that on their job and just in life in general, and being a mother, working, multitasking. So I'm saying all that to say, as far as mental health for our women, where do you start? I mean, where do you start with that as far as addressing what's women and their mental health?
So I think an important factor to think about, especially as we look at Katanji Jackson Brown, she we just got a window,
Mhm.
an opportunity to see the types of abuses, the type of insults, the type of discrimination and prejudice that women, and then more specifically African American women, often face on a daily basis. That's when we talk about this whole idea of intersectionality. There is a lot of prejudice, discrimination against women, but then when you add the intersection of race and gender, so that women can be discriminated against, but not only based on gender, but also based on their race. So women, African American women, are sometimes seen as doubly stigmatized and have to deal with the types of stresses that we know ultimately has an impact not only on mental health but on their physical health.
Mhm.
And I would venture to say that while it is, you know, it was significant to observe that her daughter witnessed that, I am certain that's probably not the first incident
Mhm. Mhm.
that her daughter has had to deal with in regards to the types of things that were witnessed through the confirmation hearings. What we see though is that women prevail through that.
Mhm.
African American women are resilient. We keep our cool.
Mhm.
We don't lose our tempers.
Mhm.
And yet we still are perceived as angry.
Mhm.
And it is that double-edged sword that I believe ultimately takes its toll. We know that when we look at statistics in regards to African Americans and then again African American women, the rates of anxiety, depression, and now we're seeing increases in suicidality have come about as a result of all of this. However, we are trying to understand this complicated picture because even with these higher rates, we do not seek care. Part of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of stigma attached to therapy and getting help, as well as resources. Many are uninsured or don't have benefits that are sufficient for mental health services, as well as there is not a great representation of people of color as mental health professionals. So it's just a very complicated picture of the types of racist, sexist ideas that women, African American women, are faced with. The fact that we have so many competing demands. Women often don't take care of ourselves because we're taking care of so many other people. And then the limits to us seeking care just make this a perfect storm.
But you would also can say that that confirmation hearing, if a lot of young African American women saw that, that's a case. It's sort of encouraging for them to see how to conduct yourself in the face of adversity. You don't. Even though we looked at it, wow, that's a negative thing, but it could be a positive going forward for some of our women coming up. For one thing, knowing that I could be in that same position, and if I get to that same position, how am I going to conduct myself?
I
And she gave
agree.
a clear example of how to do that. Because
I
we saw some of those looks, and we know
mhm.
what that meant.
She gave
Right.
him
We know what the looks mean.
she
We
gave
know
him
what
those
the
But
gave him those
it's
mama
the
looks.
looks and what
There you
comes out of
go.
your mouth are two different things.
mhm. Mhm.
Before you respond, and we got this subject, let me put the disclaimer out there. Those are out there looking at us on Facebook and YouTube and on the radio station. The views spoken today are those of the guests and of the host, and not of the radio station. And so these are our own personal views. So now we can go on, because we don't want to go in Facebook jail. And as they say, to offend
Okay,
anybody
thank you.
as we talk the truth that is being buried today.
Yeah.
So go
Yes.
ahead.
I agree with you, and I do think that she represented a very stoic and admirable presence. Um, she was understanding, and I think that that is the history. I think that is the DNA of African American people in this country. We're resilient. We stand firm in the face of all types of adversity. However, and I think that that's a beautiful model to teach us about how we can persevere. However, we can't deny that that takes an extreme emotional toll. And when we look at health disparities, I don't think that it is a coincidence then that you see higher rates of hypertension, heart disease, and then once people have these illnesses, chronic illnesses, we have higher mortality rates. So I just always use as an example when I'm teaching at Norfolk State, shameless plug, when I was teaching at Norfolk State.
Never shameless. Behold the green and gold, honey.
Oh, the green and
There
gold.
you go. That's right.
I was teaching a health psychology course, and the textbook started with the story of Jackie Robinson. And they talked about his physical prowess, how strong he was, how fast he was able to run, how he was so strong. But then talked about his early death as a result of so many chronic illnesses. Ultimately, he was blind. I believe he was diabetic. I'm not sure exactly, but I know that ultimately his health led to him dying at a very early age. And they used the example that here was this individual who had so much physical prowess, but yet endured everything that he endured by integrating baseball, the jeers that he took, the insults that he took. And it was believed that that experience caused him to have physical ailments that ultimately led to a premature death. And I believe that's what we're beginning to see now. We're beginning to make the connections between, yes, we're a resilient people. Yes, we have the fortitude that we need to endure egregious times. However, it's coming at great emotional toll and ultimately physical toll to us.
Because when you internalize these things and you don't speak out about it, it does affect your entire body, you know? So, and we tend to internalize things. And
Yes.
like you said, the whole thing is we don't believe in counseling, many of us. And some of us, the choices that we make for our counseling may not be good choices because are these people equipped to really assist us as we go through these emotional changes?
Agreed.
You know, Ernestine, you know what? I think that I watched the hearings from start to finish, every minute of it, and it triggered me. It triggered me. And the judge sat up there, and I basically took it because she had to. And there was a couple of articles that saw, you looked at the difference between her hearings and what Judge Kavanaugh did.
Thank you.
He got up there and wept and talked about he liked here and basically cussed out the Democrats on the thing. So I got a couple things that I'll put across here now that I got the stage here, is that I fought the Democrats and folks like Senator Booker, even though he gave an eloquent speech.
Oh my goodness.
They did not come to her rescue. They let her be up there and almost be lynched on national TV. They did not come to her. They came to a pseudo rescue. They did not call it out for the racism that it is. And it showed that we as Black Americans, we already know this. You can be a judge in America. You can be a colonel on active duty or a retired colonel like me. You could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer, a store clerk, or a PhD teaching at Norfolk State. But one thing is all equal. You're still Black in America. And that is a truism by itself. And we all have gone through this, and what Judge Brown got, we've all had to face that.
Yes.
And some in America are now they're saying, oh, they treated her so bad. Da, da, da. This is how we grow up. This is how we live every day. And so I'm not shocked at it. But I am one to say, for those who the Democrats and those in, when you sit by quietly, you condone it, and you condone that kind of behavior if you do not call it out by what I call the Confederates of the Republican Party. And when I label them Confederates, you look at what the Confederates stood for: racism, breaking up this country, and slavery. And that's what the Republican Party stands for today.
And you know what? Okay, go ahead, Dr. Duncan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you use the word triggered, right? And there are so many people who were triggered by this hearing.
Exactly.
And that level of frustration, then what do we do with it? You know, she was there and she was in the moment, but how many of us watched it
Mm-hmm.
and were completely triggered by it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then what do we do
Mm-hmm.
with that level of angst that we have?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with the anger that we feel like, you know, the silence makes people complicit?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so, what do we do about the anger that we feel towards our brothers and sisters
Mm-hmm.
who just allowed that to happen? And I'm sorry.
No,
Miss.
that's perfect. But you know, my fear is the younger people who have no sense of history. She was blessed to have had a sense of history from her parents. And I'm thinking about the younger people who don't have a sense of history. And I think about a young man who had gone to medical school. He had done well throughout his college years. He was applying to medical school. He had better grades than some of the other persuasions. His scores were higher than some of the better other persuasion. And he just knew that this particular medical school he was going to get into, without a doubt, he was going to get into that medical school. But he was not selected. And he could not understand what had taken place because he didn't have a sense of history. He had nothing to fall back on, you know. And so many of our young kids don't have anything to fall back on because they don't know the history. They don't know who paved the way for them. They don't know who have stood and gone through all of the stresses, the dogs, the water hoses, you know, everything that we as a people have gone through. And they think that they have arrived. And then when something like this happens to them, they're devastated.
Exactly.
They think they've checked all the boxes. I've checked all the boxes. So therefore, I'm supposed to sail through, but it's not that way. Dr. Duncan.
You know, I have to agree with the colonel saying that certain senators or all the senators, Democratic, had the opportunity to protect her. You know, we are talking now, but this is our platform. If we had, we don't have the platform that they had to come back, and especially getting back to our women. They should have really come back because for years, if you look at history, the black men had to look at their black women being raped and beaten and couldn't speak up. And now you have the opportunity to speak up to defend, to defend that woman. And that's the word should be used. It should have stepped in there and defended her.
But James, on that committee, you have to realize you only had Cory Booker and is Tim Scott on the committee?
So no.
You had no other blacks. You had no other
I'm
blacks.
talking women, men protecting women in general.
But still, women
didn't have to be black or white.
But women, you're talking about white women.
Oh, I see.
Coming to the aid of a black woman. They may not have seen it as an attack on her because they haven't had the experience. They haven't had the experience, So you didn't have anybody to really, who was a part of the experience, to understand or to have any empathy. I should not say understand, but to have any empathy for what she was going through. We expected
that's a better word. That's a better word than understand, because I can't see them being at that point and not understand what was going on there. The empathy, maybe they didn't have that.
They didn't have any empathy. With that. That's right.
Yeah.
I would agree. And interestingly, this past weekend, there was an event celebrating African American women at Grove Church that I was able to participate in. And part of the discussion talked about the ways in which African American women are not seen as human. Exactly. And that people take away our humanity.
Exactly.
And therefore, when things happen that are painful, when things happen that are insulting, it is not perceived as though African American women have feelings, valid feelings, or feelings that other human beings would have. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't allow people to be empathic, as you say. It doesn't allow, because they don't see us as human. And this is used to explain things that happened centuries ago, when we look at how African American women's bodies were exploited. You've talked about the rapes that occurred during slavery. Medical Apartheid is a book that talks about how African American women's bodies were used for medical research. Women were operated on without any anesthesia,
That's right.
and they were left without any post-surgical care.
Hmm.
And it was almost as though we are treated as animals, and sometimes animals are treated more humanely than African Americans are treated, or that women are treated. And an interesting idea came out of that discussion, because a lot of us rally around this term black girl magic. But we had a participant who said, I don't embrace that, because black girl magic keeps black women mythical.
Hmm.
It doesn't deal with the living, breathing women who, when you cut us, we bleed.
Hmm.
When you insult us, it hurts our feelings. And so let's begin to look at each other. Let's begin to look at African American women as women with feelings, women with emotions, women who are human
Hmm.
and deserve to be treated as such.
It's true. That's
So
You know,
did a subject come up at that gathering at Grove about body shaming and things like that? You know, you have the lady, the stallion, what's her name?
Megan the Stallion and
Megan the
Lizzo
Stallion.
and
You know,
Lizzo. Uh-huh.
and certain people look at that certain ways. You know, women should embrace, you know, their bodies, but you also have to look at it in a healthy way, and you can't put everybody in the same boat, because some women can have a certain size and be just as healthy as anybody, but you have to be careful if you per- portray that image to some people that might be doing it in an unhealthy way and say, okay, I'm fine, but they're not as healthy as maybe Megan the Stallion can be. Did that come up, talking body image in that?
We did not talk about body image on that particular conversation. As Ms. Stiff talked about, we talked about the importance of history,
Hmm.
so that, people who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it.
Right. That's right.
And I agree that there is a generation that now is having to deal with the types of racial, the types of sexist matters, and they're completely unprepared for that because they don't know their history. And again, for me, these matters are so complex because they don't know their history, because they're not taught their history.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
sometimes we're not taught our history. We know all about that as it relates, especially to our state of Virginia and what they are willing to teach in the schools. But sometimes we don't want to experience or trigger the pain of slavery. We don't want to bring that back up. We don't want to deal with that. And as such, we don't talk about it. And as such, our kids don't know it, don't know about it. And so they grow up thinking that they're on a level playing field.
Exactly.
And then many of them are devastated when they're met with that type of racism, sexism on an individual basis. We've always known those things to exist, but I think it was the presidency of Donald Trump, again, opinions of the guest, that made those things become so much more obvious,
Hmm.
so much more explicit, and so much more accepted, publicly accepted.
yes. You know, you put a whole litany of things, but let me put a piece of laundry out there for those who are out there in electron land listening and looking at us on Facebook and everything. We want to continue. We need to continue this program because this is the only way you're going to see the truth And if you'd like to send an honorarium or a donation, one of the same, send it to Portsmouth Coffee Talk, P.O. Box 7664. That's 7664, Portsmouth, Virginia 23707. So we can continue, because we can't do this forever for free. And so it does take money to do this. And I will go back to what Leah, another example, what Leah talked about, the med student. And then times that by the tens of thousands of would-be professionals that are coming through our great universities, especially our HBCU schools, that believe that they have checked all the blocks, and they get up there and they get denied. Mm-hmm. And he should have had a mentor, somebody to explain to him that says, life is not fair, for one. Mm-hmm. And you can only apply, you should never, if you're going to med school, not only apply to one school, but you have to apply for a dozen schools or more, because it's that hard to get in. And then once he got in, he is labeled as a affirmative action selection.
Exactly.
That's the same thing they tried to talk about her, Judge Brown's, Jackson Brown's selection. She was all of a sudden Harvard educated. Harvard went to law school, and now she's an affirmative action. Let me see your LSATs. All of a sudden. There's a problem with that. And so I've always, when I was in the military, I had and I still teach this to the young folks, and saying there is a standard of a box to checks, but you as a person of color have to check 2 boxes. If they ask you to get a master's, you better have 2. If they ask you to have such and such for military education, you better get twice as much. Without being twice as much, then you can't sit at the table. And that has been my philosophy of doing that. And then you have to take the hardest jobs that my contemporaries wouldn't even think about going to the table. Yes. And so it is tough out there. And the world is not just, because we live in a certain society that, yes, we live and we can breathe and come out there, but we have to come out here to a racist society that as Dr. Martin King says, is not judging us by the content of our character. Is not done that. Is not judging them but is judging by our color first thing, because that is the first thing that they see. So the first thing, so we have to be prepared. You can't go down there and say, when you're applying for a job, and you can't wear those cut off shorts and t-shirt or whatever that your contemporary white brothers or clothes that they can wear. You have to dress conservatively, haircut, shave, or whatever, and do that. You have to put on that role and play that role. Talk and learn how to talk and when not to talk to survive in this America. And I'll go back to, I'll go back to what Ernestine was saying. Yes, I agree with you that Mr. Trump down there in Mar-a-Lago opened the floodgates to open racism across the country, because basically he was the most racist president we've ever had in this country. A pure fool. And the only thing he didn't do on national TV didn't wear his hood. And what say you? I'll close from that before I go to jail, Facebook jail.
Yeah, my sentiments about that is, I do agree that was a very racist president. I don't know that he was the most racist, because I think what was so apparent about him was that he was open with it. I know that there are presidents who probably have shared similar ideals, but weren't as vocal and weren't as explicit about that. But to your point about having to do twice as much just to be considered on an equal playing field, one of the things I noticed, and I think this is a point of discussion, is that this generation is beginning to see the lack of logic for that. And they're saying, but why? Why do if I have a master's degree and the requirement is a master's degree, then why do I have to get two? And I'm not going to get two. And I'm going to press until somebody accepts me. And again, that is a position to take, but I think it sometimes causes more distress. It makes sense, but it causes more distress.
Hey, let me step in and as we approach 7 o'clock hour, thank the listeners on WGPL 1350 for listening as we continue on Facebook Live. And thank you for Leah and the Colonel for bringing up the part of how important the history, knowing the history is, especially what our Black women endured. I mean, so important. And that's half the battle as far as maintaining your mental health, just knowing what people before you went through. And I think that makes it much easier, and you all are right, much easier for you to deal with what's going on now because it's still happening. And Dr. Duncan, I want to ask you, what should some women be aware of some signs that they should be aware of that might be taking on a little too much or things, or they might need to seek some sort of professional clinical help as opposed to just looking, just saying, okay, I'll live for another day. So what are some of the things they should look for, as far as being overwhelmed as a woman?
That's such a great question. And I think it starts with all of us, men, women, all of us, paying attention. I think that many times we put ourselves on autopilot. And for example, if we talk about today, for example, I knew that coming on the radio show, I needed to be up by 5:30 or so, right? And then I knew there were other things I needed to do because today is a work day. And just kind of going on autopilot with, okay, once the show is over, then I'm going to be ready to leave the house to get to campus. Then I want to get to campus. I have 3 things I need to do. And then tonight we have a panel discussion on Black women and mental health. So my day will be from 5:30 this morning till about 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. A very long day. And it's not unusual for us to have those kinds of days. But then what will we do during those hours to pay attention to how I'm feeling? Many of us get so autopiloted that we don't even remember that it's time to eat. So you look up and it's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and you haven't had anything to eat all day. I'm sure your body's been sending you signals that you were hungry, but you were so focused on what you had to get done. So the first thing that I would suggest is that we begin to just pay attention. And then once we pay attention, to give ourselves some grace and stop driving ourselves so hard. There's a new concept that I've become aware of and I've started teaching about called self-compassion. And it turns out that most of us don't have self-compassion. We have compassion for everybody else, but we don't have compassion for ourselves. And it starts with being mindful and paying attention to what's going on in our bodies. What are we thinking? And then it talks about our humanity and the fact that many of us feel like, well, if I'm tired, I really shouldn't be tired because I've got all of these things to do. I've got all of these people relying on me. So I need to continue to push myself, even in the face of being fatigued, even in the face of being sad. I need to press forward. And then finally, it has to do with, because there are 3 parts to it. One is the awareness. Second is the humanity of it. And then thirdly is showing ourselves grace for that. If somebody told you, I've got to do 12 things today, And we would say, why don't you look at that and see if maybe you could cut that down and do some tomorrow? But we don't hold ourselves to the same grace. We say, no, I got to get it done, and I've got to get it done today. So that's one of the things that I would suggest first, and that's just paying attention and giving ourselves some compassion.
Right.
I also think that when you do that, then you'll become aware of when you're overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
You'll become aware of when you've been triggered by something that happened. And you can be proactive and not fall victim to making bad choices or having consequences. When it comes to our emotional health, what we see most usually with women, African American women, is depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
When you pay attention, you can then identify those emotions and govern yourself accordingly. And usually we think that people will do best if they get help, if they find that these emotions, depression, anxiety, interferes with their ability to conduct their daily lives. So if you have difficulty getting out of the bed in the morning because you dread what's going to happen that day, or you're so sad and depressed about it you don't have the energy to start your day, that's a sign. If you're thinking about things, ruminating on things that keep you anxious throughout a day, that might be a sign that you need to get some help.
Mhm.
So again, it starts with paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Also, Dr. Duncan, we put it on the women to be aware of what's going on with them. And especially, it's also important if you have a partner, male or female, that they be aware of what, you know, what kind of stress or things that you're doing. And like you said, women should cut their things in half. Maybe you should step in and say, okay, I'll take care of this for you. So you don't have to take on that whole, and some of us men, we good for, especially on those Sundays, for sitting on that couch and watching those games all day, when we could just say, okay, in between the games or during the games, I'll tape it or something like that. Let me take on this task to make it a little easier on you. And I think it's a participatory thing that we should all help. We can't put it on the women to just be aware of what they need to do without us stepping in and saying, well, I see what you're going through. Maybe I need to step in and do a little more too. So you have to put that on the men as well, even though we're talking about mental health of women.
I agree.
Yes. But one thing about in the corporate world, you're always taught to say, if I put something off or I give it to somebody else, I'm surrendering, and then I'm less than. So we have to be careful on how we see that. But, the panel discussion that you're going to be on today, is it open to the public, and are you going to stream it out here to the public?
It is open to the public. It is going to happen at 6 o'clock, and it's going to happen by Zoom. NSU is publicizing it on their website. I might be able to coordinate and put it in the chat if people are interested. I can put the Zoom link in the chat. It's going to be a panel of about 8 women. I don't want to start naming them because I know I'm going to forget, but it's a very diverse panel of women. I do know Dr. Cynthia Burwell, who is in the Department of Health and Exercise Science, and she's also the director of the Center for Health, the Center of Excellence in Health Disparities, is going to be on that panel. I know that Dr. Bernadette Holmes, who is a professor of sociology and speaks about the distinction in how women are treated in the criminal justice system. And I'm going to stop there because those are the ones that I know about. But it will be it's about 6 or 7 women. Dr. Val Jean Johnson out of the Department of Education. And so we're hoping to have a very well-rounded conversation. And to your point, I also wanted to say, Colonel, in regards to our history and telling our own story. On Saturday, one of the speakers was Brenda Andrews, who's the owner and editor of the New Journal and Guide. And she talked about the need to continue to have Black newspapers to tell our story, but to also tell it from our perspective. And so it's really important that we begin to understand the narratives of our people, our communities, but that we don't understand it through the lens of a media that's not kind to us. And that's why shows like this, right, and newspapers like the New Journal and Guide are critical to our health and our success.
Yes, you're correct. I participated last week in a Zoom thing with the Army Nurse Corps, and they had their deputy chief, who was the number 2 person for the Army Nurse Corps on active duty, and also represents the reserves also. And she's an African American female. And I posed the question, and it goes back to the diversity in education, health education in the Army Nurse Corps. And I gave her some statistics on one, on the recruiting piece, that the numbers aren't reflecting what we have in America, and also in the Corps, their numbers are way down, because I looked at, say, for their practitioners on that level, they're like minuscule compared to our Caucasian numbers. And I came back and I talked about some of the policies that the Trump administration had put in that actually solidified by policy overt and racism that's killing our youth in the crib, as Steve Bannon says. And so after I brought it out there, I know it stumped her, and I looked at her on there, and I could see that I could see in her eyes saying, "Oh man, this retired colonel just called me out, and I don't know how to get out of this." So she gave me some politician's answer to it. But having called her out, I look at our leadership out there, and I have to shake our head. Our youth that are coming through, they're in trouble. They are in trouble because there is a certain segment that's in the hierarchy that is saying, "I got mine, you got to get yours," and that is a problem. And nobody wants to tell the truth. And as Martin Luther King said, and you've also expressed it, it said that silence is complicity.
It's complicity. That's right.
And it's a shame. It is a shame.
We talk about our history, and we talk about us as a people and some of the cultural dimensions. And what we know without question is that people of color tend to be more collectivists. We're about the group and being a part of the group and contributing to the group and benefiting from being in the group. But our current society, American society, is very individualistic. And the more that we adopt the ways of the majority, what is not too much longer going to be the majority culture, but we have adopted those ways. And so many of our communities, we've become more individualistic in the way that we handle our traditions, we handle our values, and we don't share that information, as you said. And it's coming at great cost to our younger generation.
Yes. And also, as you over there teaching and inspiring our youth to come out, and you've been a clinical psychologist, and if I go out and I want to seek any kind of health care, I want to see somebody that looks like me, at least have the opportunity that looks like me, because I know I can talk to that person more freely than I can somebody that has a white coat on and is the shade of the white coat, that doesn't really experience what I would bring, what makes me. And so I'm always for education, more of us coming in the healthcare field. And
yes,
I understand what Leah was saying, and that young man, there are so many that don't get in that, they get that first no and have never been told no in their life, and they're left at the railroad tracks. And he'll probably never, so many don't apply, and they go on and take another career when they should be a provider, and they just stepped on that one, they hit that first crick in the road. And as Judge Brown says, persevere. Because we are going to take that long, we are on a long crickety road for us. There's no straight line from A to B. We have to take detours to get to where we want to go, and be able to say and understand, hey, we're going to be told no, or you can't, or it's not your time, or wait. Those are the or you're too young, or you're too old. But there's always a roadblock somewhere in there, and so we have to persevere.
Yes. And that's where I think we talk about resilience.
Yes.
That's for sure. So this is I was thinking we had yesterday at the program a young lady from the YMCA. She's the CEO,
Michelle Ellis.
Oh my God. And she addressed those
Ellis Young.
Yeah, Ellis Young. She addressed some of the very issues about the women and what women have done to pave the way for those who are coming behind them, and I'm just happy to see that you all are having the forum on tonight, and I hope that more young women will join in, at least listen in on the forum, and get a better understanding of what's ahead for them and how to prepare themselves for the future.
And this speaks to my dilemma as an educator. I've found increasingly that young women, young men, they don't want to know. And so the challenge has come with trying to engage them so that they can get the information that would help them to persevere. Over the 20 years I've been at Norfolk State, I've seen the face of the students change from wanting to know so that they can be better, to coming in, and I believe that this is a societal issue. It is not unique to HBCUs. It is not unique to Black students, but students coming in thinking that they already know.
Yes.
And more importantly, thinking that we don't know.
Exactly.
And so it becomes a battle of wills to get them to really, one, seek out, and secondly, appreciate and value the history and the experiences of those who have gone on before them. It's become a real struggle. And I think that it's detrimental.
And Dr. Duncan, and I think reality TV has been detrimental to our young women, because all of our young women want to look like the girls on Atlanta Housewives, and they think that they are the basketball wives, and they want to dress the way they dress. They want to have their hair the way they wear their hair. I mean, just want to duplicate what they're watching on reality TV. And they're thinking that is that is who they are. It's about the hair, it's about the lashes, it's about the makeup, it's about the dress, it's about, and that's not in essence who they are. And when they don't have those things, they have nothing to fall back on.
Exactly.
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly. And as I look at it as a psychologist, and those women have very, very little or very poor coping skills.
Yes.
You push them just a little bit, and they're throwing drinks, and they're fighting, and they are just completely ugly toward each other.
Exactly.
And those are the things that our young women are seeing, and those are the things that our young women are emulating.
That's true.
And so that's more attractive to them than someone who's going to school for 4 years to complete their college degree and maybe going on to do something else, they would rather emulate a reality TV star than some. And if you notice, that's what our media is projecting.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I like to give a shout out to someone's watching, Alana Glover, who was one of our guests, and she's a young attorney in Baltimore, Maryland, working with a firm in corporate division of that firm. But I think she's an example of knowing her history because she also does pro bono work, in her community for people less fortunate that probably can't afford attorneys. So that's one of those perfect examples of Leah, some of our young folks knowing their history and knowing, even though she's in a corporate setting, she knows where her services are also needed. So shout out to you, Alana Glover, for watching and doing what you're doing.
But you know what? Also goes back to also, Dr. Duncan, social media and how they treat each other on social media, and they don't realize the things that you put out there stay forever. It never goes away. I don't care if you delete it, it's still there. But how they come at each other on social media.
Agreed. I think when we talk about mental health and social media, they are almost mutually exclusive. I like the social media where people are given affirmations and they're talking about positive things in the life. However, there are many people who are presenting a false narrative, and they only present those positive things, and they make their lives look as though they're ideal, when in actuality their lives are very painful to them. I think we became aware of that recently with the suicides, the publicized suicides that we saw with Black women, who looked very successful, who lived like they were living very charmed lives. But in reality, they were struggling with mental health issues, depression. And we participated in the Out of the Darkness suicide prevention walks for many years. And they would always say suicide is the most preventable cause of death, because suicide is the result of untreated depression.
Wow. Yes. But you know what? Slim talked about Attorney Glover up there in Baltimore, and I have to even applaud her because one, and I go back to the Supreme Court hearings with Judge Brown, and as a public defender, even though the Constitution says everybody should have a lawyer, and all of a sudden the Confederates are saying if you participate and you give if you are a public defender, you're less than a lawyer. And so I got to applaud Attorney Glover on that piece, that keep doing what you're doing. She can also rise to new levels, and don't listen to the Confederates of America that are out there.
And as you talk about, having a doctor that looks like you, representation is important. And so her practicing as an attorney and being available to people speaks volumes and brings to reality, makes reality for young girls, young men who see her and know that because she did, they can also.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think last week we had an optometrist on. And so that number is even smaller in the greater scheme of things. And so I always try to look out, and one, even when I go to the Naval Hospital and they have TRICARE, and it's almost like socialized medicine to a near piece. But I always ask that I'd like to see a nurse practitioner. because I have a kinship. Me being a nurse, I know that I can get more time, and I can explain the things, and I know that I'll get I get better care by seeing a nurse practitioner than I would seeing my internal medicine doctor that I see that wants to get me in and out within that 15 minutes of time that he or she has. And that nurse practitioner is going to sit down and listen to my story, and we can come up with a plan, versus they just want to check a block and keep me going on and get credit so they can go to the next meeting. Yes.
Yeah. I think, when we talk about cultural differences, one of the things as it relates to medical care is just having that knowledge and to be assertive, to ask for what you want. And many times people in our community, we just kind of accept what's given to us, and we don't get the care that we need, and that could be legal help, medical help. I'm aware of the literature that talks about medical help and being more assertive and demanding what it is that we need to get the help that we need. And we have to be able to be assertive about that.
Yes. Well, you know what? Here's another thing. Now you're talking about the medical help. Now, we've listened for 12 years now, or now it's in the year 13 about Obamacare. But when this pandemic had highlighted the need for health insurance, so many people didn't have health insurance. So if you had to roll back things, and those folks that are out there with no health insurance and had to go into the hospital because of COVID, and now they're getting these big bills, and those who are covered by Obamacare, they're straight, and you don't see them clamoring to get rid of Obamacare, except for some of the real fringe Confederates out there on the Republican side. There's a big disparity on if you were covered versus you're uninsured. I run into if you go into the emergency room, I got COVID symptoms, or I'm having some chest pain, there is a different standard of healthcare that you get. And especially if you're of color. And I always roll it back to, there's black folks medicine and there's white folks medicine. And if I'm going there and I go to the emergency room, I'm uninsured, and I've been exposed and I've got some symptoms, I'm COVID positive, they're telling me, go home and treat your symptoms. Or versus I'm white, I come in with the same symptoms, I'm COVID positive, and now they're giving me the COVID pill, and that's going to, or either they're running me back in there and giving me an IV for the Regeneron, and so I'm getting white folks meds. So my chances of survival have expanded, and so there is a disparity out there, and we have to really realize that.
There's a disparity there, and I think this is also complicated by something we talked about earlier, and that is the perception that blacks are less than human.
Exactly.
Yes.
And, I'm aware of this particularly as it relates to African American women and maternal health. And that African American women are dying at a much higher rate in childbirth. Children are dying at a higher rate because the symptoms that black women report during pregnancy, during labor, are often dismissed. The interesting thing that we learned this weekend, however, is that African American girls born prematurely have the highest survival rate. So it's interesting that while we have the highest mortality rates in terms of pregnancy and maternal health, there is something about African American girls that is resilient even in the womb. And we can't deny that.
I can attest to that just looking at my granddaughter. She came early, like she was ready for the world. But anyway, Dr. Duncan, I want to, I know we have to be aware of your time, and you have to get to campus to do what you do.
Time
And
fast
but
today.
I wanted to, before we get, I wanted to talk about, the young girls. You just mentioned young girls, the young girls or young women that are college students, and some of the pressures they might go through, and a lot of it might be pressures they put on themselves. That's why a social life on campus is so important. As long as you are focused on what's important, what your priorities are. But what would you say to uh, young women, college students, and men? But we're focusing on women, young women, college students, how to manage their mental health while they're in college, and some of them have a lot of pressure from back home to be successful, or like I said earlier, they put on themselves in order to be, and also going back to that piece, knowing the history of way
Mm-hmm.
black women get treated, so they feel that extra pressure as well to make sure they succeed, and like it was talked about, have those extra degrees. So what would you say to those women that how to manage that, their mental health?
I'm really glad for that question, because a lot of times people don't know that when we study stress, when psychology studies stress, the population that is studied that is considered to be the highest stressed across the lifespan is college students.
Mm-hmm.
College students are thought to be the most highly stressed group of people across the lifespan, right? And that's because of the many demands that they're trying to meet, the academic pressures. You mentioned earlier the body image, right? Then there's also the social media presence and the things that they're trying to do to present themselves that way. One of the good things that came out of COVID was an acknowledgement that these times are stressful. And so we see many programs that are being developed, that are being implemented for college students on college campuses. And those services are available to them from the counseling center to sister circle support groups. So we ask women, young women, to get involved, to not isolate. We put more responsibility on resident assistants to look at the girls and to see when they're participating versus when they're not participating, and reaching out, as you said, maybe trying to share the load. Dr. Vanessa Jenkins, who was also on that panel tonight, and I've placed the Zoom link for the channel,
Yes.
for the Zoom in the chat. She talks about really backing up when we ask people, "How are you doing?" Don't make it that customary, "I'm good."
Mm-hmm.
Ask people, "How are you doing?" And I mean really.
How you doing?
And for us to give the message, whether we give it obviously or whether we give it subtly, that it is okay not to be okay. Often when people tell us that they're struggling with something, our default response is, "Oh girl, you're going to be okay. Oh girl, it's going to work out." When in reality, it may not be okay. It may not work out. And so people then women present themselves as, "Oh, I'm going to be okay. It's going to be all right. I'll make it through," when they are really suffering on a daily basis. So we ask women to pay attention to their sleeping habits. Is their stress level impacting their ability to sleep? Do they have insomnia? And this is interesting because this is a dysregulation. Some people think I'm stressed if I can't sleep. If I fall asleep and then I wake up, I must be stressed. But there are some people whose stress manifests itself by sleeping too much.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just if you can't sleep, you got to pay attention to it. What are your sleeping habits, and have they changed? Similar to your eating. There are some people who, when under stress, they don't eat. Then there's some people in my camp that when you're stressed, all you do is eat. Right. So it's a dysregulation again of eating. So paying attention to your habits is really important. Setting boundaries. You know, we sometimes have college students who are working around the clock. And we find this particularly with our student population at Norfolk State. They are responsible for caregiving, either parents or children. They may have full-time jobs and they're going to school, and they try to juggle all of these things over the course of a day, over the course of a week. Be able to set some boundaries. I'm going to work until 7 o'clock, and then I'm going to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you mentioned, Mr. Overton, you mentioned helping out. You know, maybe sometimes get off the couch and help. And that's very important, and it's a good thing. But sometimes offering a distraction. Let's watch a movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of you piddling around the house and doing everything, let's take a break. Let's stop. Let's sit down. And when you really think about it, the average movie is an hour and 30 minutes. Can we take an hour and 30 minutes out of our day to just have some downtime, to have some together time? Sometimes it can manifest itself in a meal. You know, as families, we don't have prescribed dinner times anymore where we sit down and we can have an exchange about our day. Those kinds of social supports are critical to good mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And so having those times and those opportunities to be engaged and to share with people is a good and an important way to be proactive about protecting our mental health. There are so many ways, but I know for the sake of time, I will just mention those. Pay attention to what's going on with your body. Pay attention to what's going on with your thinking. Be compassionate towards yourself. Set boundaries. Know when you're having changes. I'm having difficulty sleeping, or I'm sleeping too much. I don't have an appetite, or I can't stop eating. Pay attention to those signs and address them.
And you know, and Dr. Duncan, we're blessed now too with these smart watches that we wear now, because my watch tells me it's time to take a moment to be mindful. Or it's
Yes.
time to take a moment to breathe.
Yes.
You know, and for the longest time I ignored it when it would pop up on the phone.
Mhm.
But now when it pops up and say, take a moment for mindfulness, because I realize I'm running here, I'm running there, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm just moving. I take that moment now. I said, take a minute to breathe. And I take that minute to breathe. So there are things that you can use to kind of trigger you into knowing that now it's time to just take a moment. Take
Yes.
a moment, you know.
And
for
to
yourself.
honor that. And to
Exactly.
honor that.
Exactly.
You know, many times we get the signal, we get the time, but as you say, we're trying to be productive. We know we've got to do one more thing. Let me do that. And I'll just share one thing that I recognized yesterday, because I think that this is something that affects all of us. And I can sit here and talk to you as a psychologist. I can sit here and talk to you as an educator. But most importantly, I think what I have to share is my experience as a woman. And on yesterday, we got a last minute deadline for something that was due. It was actually due Saturday, but we didn't find out until Friday. So we attempted to work on it. And I was working on it yesterday after church, and I have recently not worked on, give yourself a Sabbath day. You know, that has a whole lot of spiritual connotation and meaning, religious connotation and meaning, but also medical. And so I had stopped working on Sundays, but I found it necessary to work on yesterday. And at a certain point, I started getting tension in my neck that radiated all the way down my shoulder. And I ignored it because I had a deadline. But what I was grateful about was the fact that I became aware of it. There were times prior to this that I would just push through and work, and I would experience that tension, but I would be so focused I wouldn't recognize it. And then I'd go and get a massage, and they would say, "Oh my God, I've never seen anybody so tense in their shoulders as you are." And that's why for me, I advocate paying attention to your body. Your body gives you signs. But it is our responsibility to acknowledge, to pay attention, acknowledge those signs, and to do something about it. So I was able to stop working, set a boundary at a certain time. What didn't get done, didn't get done. But I did not force my body to meet the demands of something that it was telling me it was too much.
You know, on that note, I just have to say this. I remember being in college and you talk about burning that midnight oil, and sometimes when you weren't really prepared for test the next day and you try to sit up that night
All
and,
night.
and get all that stuff in one night. And I remember one night saying to myself, look, man, you know, it was a learning experience. I said, man, you know, just go to bed, because if you don't know it now, you know, you're not gonna get it all in one night, you know. So it taught me next time to be more prepared leading up to that test than waiting to that opportunity, waiting to that time the day before the test and try to cram. And oftentimes in college you have to cram, you know, but you don't always have to. You know,
You
it's
don't
just a
always.
matter of prioritizing yourself and making sure and keeping that stress off, you know,
Yeah.
because it can tell it's told. And, you know, we've all, if you've been to college, you've all seen people not make it through because of mental issues, not because they couldn't do the work. It was just that they put so much on themselves. And, you know, so hopefully the college students will, you know, take it easy on themselves sometime and just be more prepared leading up to a situation rather than trying to cram and just make your priorities.
I would
Uh,
agree.
Go ahead.
I would
I
agree.
know you have to leave, but I wanted to say this one other thing. The colonel brought up that he always talks about uh, supporting us, and I wanted to just say the reason we always ask for that support. Uh, just last Friday, this Black News Network was launched not too long ago, and they had to shut down because they had one big contributor, and when they didn't get the numbers, he backed off, and they had to shut down the whole. You know, well, when that one contributor came in, it ceased to be a Black network ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons we try to we make requests for donations and things like that because we want the people that are watching us to be participants in what we do here, and so we can have control over the content. And it's important, like you mentioned about Brenda Andrews and the new journaling guide that's been around forever. They can control, you know, their contents and what they get out to our communities, and that's what we try to do here. So if you see us asking for help, it's not for us, it's for Portsmouth Coffee Talk, so we can expand what we do here. So, and I appreciate Colonel always making that point, and just wanted to say that, you know, because if we have any other kind of control, then people will step in and say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. And we don't want to go there. We want to be able to have who we want to have as our guests and control what we share with the communities that are so important to us. And on that note, let me just say you can contribute by Zelle, Portsmouth Coffee Talk at gmail.com, Cash App, $ PCT 1220, and PayPal.me at PCT LLC. Or, like the Colonel said, Post Office Box 7664, Portsmouth, Virginia 23707. So please support us. And if you watch us on our YouTube page, subscribe to us. You know, it's important that we get those numbers up. But, you know, it's good to have the numbers, but we want to be able to just spread good information to our community. And so we're not going to sell ourselves out just to get the numbers and do some crazy stuff like you see on social media out here. And their numbers are huge because people like to see, sometimes make the, Leah and I was talking about Amos and Andy a little while ago. People like to see buffoonery sometimes, and not putting down those people. Well, yes, I am. If that's the way you have to get the message out to the communities, I personally don't agree with that way. I like the way we're going, And we
Yes.
want the numbers too, but we want to do it in a responsible way.
Exactly.
So thank you everybody for watching. And
Mhm.
Dr. Duncan, thank you. Dr. Duncan has been with us for over 5 years when I did a solo, and she's a reoccurring guest. And it's always time to talk about mental health, So hope you continue to come back when we ask you. You never turn us down
Yeah.
early in the morning, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll get you on some of our
PM show.
evening
Evening
edition shows,
edition.
so you don't have to get up so
Well,
early.
I would
But
just
we have
like
an
to
evening.
thank, yeah, I would just like to thank you all for allowing me to be a recurring guest. I think that this is one of the most important topics that as a community we can talk about. And you have always been welcoming, and you've always been interested in wanting to share it. And for that, I'm grateful. And I thank you again for having me today.
Yeah, thank you.
And
We
Dr.
will be
Duncan,
watching that panel tonight at Norfolk State University.
yes, I was going to say, look in the chat room. She has given us the link to the Zoom meeting tonight on the women's panel for Norfolk State University. And Dr. Duncan, thank you once again for all that you do as well. And we got to keep spreading this information to women so that we can become healthier individuals. And once we're healthy, then we can help those that we tend to run out here to help on a daily basis. So once again, I want to say thank you so very much. It's
Thank you.
always a pleasure seeing your face in the morning.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll say likewise. And it's always great to see you at this time, and always a wealth of information. My wife Tony says hello this morning too, as she heads
So
out.
yeah, please tell Tony I say hello too.
Yes. So as she heads out the door, I'm gonna let you head out the door.
Okay, thank
And,
you so
and
much. You
thank
guys
you,
have a
Dr.
great day.
Yes.
Thank you. And I have to use this. Oh, you didn't hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Next time. I had the little clapping thing, but I guess I have to work on that. But anyway, thanks again. And I appreciate it. And thank everybody for watching Portsmouth Coffee Talk. And join us this Thursday on Portsmouth Coffee Talk, the evening edition, and we'll announce the guests as we get closer to that date. Just want to confirm it. But every Thursday at 7 o'clock, we have Portsmouth Coffee Talk, the evening edition. And
Nice.
watch us there, and also continue to be with us in the morning at 6:30 a.m. every Monday morning. And we thank you, and God bless you. And take care. Have a great week.
Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, co-host.
Okay, bye-bye.
We're gonna
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Behold,
The green and
green and
gold.
go.
for real, the maroon and steel. You. And Hampton.